So today, as I've said, we're going to talk about progress reviews, and to give you a little bit of overview of what progress review is all about and how it works. Now, why? I can't move my slides. Okay, trying again. No. Are you seeing that I've moved down on my slides? No, it's giving me hassles. I'm trying again. There we go. So I'll talk a little bit about what the goal is with reviews, and then I'll go into each one of them individually because they have got a different goal, each one of them. But in general, we can say that if we look at the Masters by Research, there are 3 reviews, and for the PhD, there are 4 reviews. For the Masters by Research, there's the pre-confirmation of candidature, the confirmation of candidature, and the draft thesis review. Whereas for PhD, it's the pre-confirmation review, the COC, and then the mid-candidature review and the draft thesis review. So the Masters by Research has got 1 less review than the PhD, and that has to do with that the Masters by Research is 2 years and the PhD is 3 years, and that mid-candidature review is usually an important part of the whole review process. So why do we have reviews? The first thing is that it is to monitor and manage your progress as a candidate, and to see where you're at and that things don't drift. If you don't have these checks and balances in there, things can kind of like snowball out of control and you just don't get to them. So it's literally then to see where you're at. And with the introduction of the GC resin, it is to check how things are going and whether you are on track with the graduate certificate. Now, many students find, or PhD and Masters by Research students find, or when they talk about it, they really perceive the reviews as a negative thing. And it isn't. It is about giving constructive feedback and giving guidance on where you're at. Sometimes things just happen and everybody starts in you and your supervisors starts to do some groupthink, and it's good to have somebody else have a look at that and give a different perception about where you're at and what's going to happen, what you need to do. So, as part of the review, one of the key things is that you need a review panel, and that needs to be set up 6 weeks before you do your pre-confirmation of candidature review. It usually consists of 3 people, sometimes 4, but it usually has a panel of 3, and it has got a panel chair, which is an associate professor or a professor, preferably, and then 2 other members that are usually accredited supervisors. One of them needs to be outside of your specific discipline area, again, to make sure that, if you write that somebody that doesn't quite understand or know about your specific area, that they can understand what is going on there. And then in some cases, specifically if you're doing research for an organisation, they would like to be on the panel as well, or if there's some kind of organisational sponsor that needs to be part of that. Now, with the new CAP, we've had to come up with a different process of getting this panel nominated. So we will be telling all supervisors, or we have told all supervisors how to go about doing it. But I am the only one as Academic Director Research Training that can initiate a panel nomination form. You need to do, this needs to be done, as this says, 6 weeks, 3 to 6 weeks before the review takes place. The other expectation is that the panel will stay the same right through your PhD or Masters by Research. So you kind of like get to know this panel quite well. Sometimes it's not possible, but that is the intention, is that they stay the same. So with the pre-confirmation of candidature, this is to, I kind of like see it as an extended supervision meeting. It is where you, your supervisors, and at least the panel chair get together and talk about the research and where you're at, and you know, what are your plans and whether you're on the right track. And it is a checkpoint very early to, you know, kind of like get an idea of whether this is viable or whether it's not viable. What you need to do is you need to produce a document of about 1,000 to 2,000 words, and most students find that quite hard to do. They usually up to 3, even some of them I've seen is up to 6,000 words for this document. So it's really hard to keep it at that 1,000 to 2,000 words, but that is the intention. It's not a big thing. It's putting it down, what you are going to do. And one of the things that you can expect, even though you might have very little on written in your document, is that there will be a lot of talk about research method, how you will go about, whether you've got the literature under control, and where you need to do some reading. This review is usually 60 minutes, and there's no formal presentation. In most of the ones that I have either taken part in as a panel member or that my students have done, the panel chair usually asks the student just to give a 5-minute overview of where they're at and, you know, what has been happening in their research. So how should you prepare for that? You need to do your document, of course. You need to make sure that you have done work on the topic and, you know, the research questions that you at this stage think that you would like to address. You need to include a timeline of when what will happen, and typically what will be in there would be these 4 reviews. Your ethics application, if you need ethics application, a date or a kind of like a guesstimate of when that will happen. And then one of the other things that the panel probably will talk to you about is that they will say, so are you going to publish? And maybe you need to put some you know, milestones in your plan for when you are thinking that you will be able to publish some papers. What is a good strategy beforehand is to think about what type of questions the panel might ask you and to prepare for those questions. You know, many supervisors will say, well, you know, I think the panel is going to ask you about this, right? They're going to ask you about why haven't you read or have you thought about that specific area of research? And it's good to have, because it's you know, I'm saying that it is, you know, for you and to support you in, in how you do your PhD, but it's kind of like confronting, and it's not always that easy on the spot to think of answers. What is important is that what the panel will look at is that written document and how well you communicate, and also how well you answer your questions. You need to see this as a learning opportunity and not as a defense of your work. So what I tell my students is that if they've got an answer, right, so if a panel asks a question, they've got an answer, give that answer. But if it is going into that, it looks like it's going into a debate that they say you need to look at X theory, but not Y theory, you know, that there's a debate, then you say, you just say, thank you, I haven't thought of that, or yes, I'll take it up with my supervisors, or that's a really interesting thought, I haven't thought of that, and I'll go and take a look at that specific literature. So what can you expect in terms of the outcome? There's one or two outcomes that it's satisfactory. So the panel thinks that you are at the right level and that they think that this is a viable topic for you to do for your research. The other outcome is unsatisfactory. That means that you have to then come up with an action plan, usually based on the feedback that the panel has given you, and that there will be a follow-up review within 15 working days from that review. So this is a fast one. With all of the others, you'll see it takes a little bit longer. But remember, with the pre-COC, it's that initial engagement with the literature, coming up and thinking about a topic. So it has to be quick at this stage. So the big review is the confirmation of candidature. And this is the big test. If you can get past this specific review, then, you know, in a way I can say it's going downhill from there, because all of the others are then easier. So what is the confirmation of candidature about? You need to address the question of, so what? Why is this important? What is the contribution? What is the literature saying about that, this specific topic that you've chosen? And how are you going, where is the gap that you're going to address, or what is the problem that you're trying to address? You need to be able to demonstrate that the research can be completed in the time available. So if you come up with a research method that, and a way of collecting data, for example, that's really complex, then the panel might say this is not doable in the 2 years that you've got left to do that. And you need to demonstrate that you will make a contribution to knowledge, an original contribution to knowledge. Now, there's a little bit of a difference between what level is required for a master's by research and the level that's required for a PhD. For the PhD, there needs to be more significant contribution to knowledge than what there would be for a master's by research. So how should you prepare for your COC? One of the things that's important is that you need to meet up regularly with your supervisors. And if I am the supervisor, I usually want to see my full-time students every 2 weeks to see how they're doing and where they're at. I usually also ask them to write regularly. That's one of the key things, is that you've got to write, you keep on writing, because the more you write, specifically for those of us who English is not our first language, the more you write, the easier it becomes to write, and the more engaged you become with your topic and with the literature, and understanding how that happens. It also helps the supervisors to understand where you are at. If they have something that they can read, they can see, you as a student are not quite understanding this specific topic, and they can guide you to go and read some other work. Or they might say things like, well, you've read this now, I can see you have an understanding, but you need to go out and do some more reading about this, that specific topic. So it really helps if you do a lot of writing, because in the end, what you've got to deliver is a thesis of, with a PhD, 70,000 to 100,000 words. And so it's about writing. The other thing that's quite important at the COC level is that you understand about journal rankings. And again, your supervisor will be able to guide you through this whole process of journal rankings. But it's important to understand that if you read a paper that is published in an A-star journal, so that's the top level of journals, they are sometimes difficult to understand. So, you know, for some of those papers, you've got to read them 2 or 3 times. And at the beginning, it feels like nothing is moving, that you're not making progress, but you need to keep at it. It becomes easier the more you do that. The other thing that is important is that you need to get some kind of way of managing and organizing your literature. So the one piece of software that we use and that's available through the university is EndNote. There's quite a number of others that you can have a look at, like Zotero, Mendeley. All of these have got different you know, positives and negatives associated with them. What you know, I considered the other day to or had a look at what's the difference between EndNote and Zotero, and the conclusion I came to is that all of them have got their idiosyncrasies, and I have invested so much in EndNote that I'll rather stay in EndNote. There's also some sessions that the library has on how to use EndNote and you know, how EndNote works. So if you haven't done that, please get yourself into one of those sessions. You also need to learn how to search in databases on the library, and that's probably the thing that has made research so much easier, is that we can sit in our you know, office or at our home and we can search for literature. I remember when I started doing this, I spent hours and hours in the library going through documents, and things have just improved significantly from then. You can also set up some alerts on your topics, look at calls for papers, and also get an understanding of your HDR allowance and what you will be able to use it for. And Helen will also be, you know, able to answer. There's lovely information about that on the wiki that you can go through and see what you can use your allowance for. So what do you need to deliver for the COC? It needs to be between 10 and 20,000 words that you need to deliver. So what needs to be in there? You need to answer the questions: what has been done about this topic? How are you going to get your data? And how available is that data? Why is this an interesting research setting? What's unique about this? What is your method? And there's quite a significant part of the COC is about the research method and how you're going to collect your data. You need to motivate your topic. You need to saying something like, well, nobody's done anything about this. There's insufficient literature and more you know, academic language is not good enough, right? So some things we just don't need to research, even though nobody else has done it. So you need to talk about why this is important, and you need to link that to the contribution. You need to also answer the question whether this data collection method that you've chosen, whether that fits with what you are trying to do. And you might be expected to write things that will or will not go into your proposal. So that's one thing that I, you know, say to many of my students. I say sometimes, you know, we frustrate as supervisors. We frustrate students because PhD students, because we change our mind, right? It looks like we don't actually know what we're doing. But the one thing that is unique about the PhD is that there is no direct path. It isn't a straight line. Sometimes the only way you know that something will work or won't work is when, as a supervisor, you see it written down. So for one of my students, my first one, I remember she had 2 literature review chapters. As supervisory team, we read that and we said, no, this is not working. You need to put them back together again. So she went away and she put them back together again. We read that and we said, no, still not working. You need to pull them apart again. So we had her go through this for at least 2 or 3 times, and she got really, really frustrated about this. So just remember that it isn't a straight path. Sometimes it will feel really frustrating that a supervisor will say you've written, 5,000 words about a specific topic, and they say, no, that won't go into your thesis, or you need to drop that from your thesis. You need to do a really good literature review. You need to make sure that you know how you've gone about looking at the literature, so that the panel can't say to you that you have read a key piece of literature, that you haven't read it and that you're not referring to that specific literature. So how does the process work? Usually when you get in with a COC, it's 90 minutes. You will be asked to make a presentation of 15 minutes, and the panel chair might give you a sign to say, okay, now it's time for you to stop or finish off. Then the other thing to remember, so sometimes students think, the supervisors will help you out. And that, so if you ask difficult questions that you kind of like looking at the some students expect the supervisors to jump in and say, oh, no, this is how it needs to work. This is your session. It's not the supervisor's session. So what you need to expect is that the supervisors will only make a comment if in really difficult situations. It's your PhD, you or Masters by Research, you are the one that needs to have the answers, or need to be able to give answers. Then after, so there's 15 minutes of presentation that you give, then about 35 minutes of questions and answers. Then you will be asked to leave the room, and the panel will talk to your supervisors. Then the panel will ask the supervisors to leave, and you will come in and they will talk to you, and they'll ask you things like, how is it going with your studies? Are you meeting your supervisors on a regular basis? And use that opportunity. Usually if things go wrong, this is the time, if you're not quite comfortable with what's happening, this is the time to say, I'm not quite comfortable with how things are going. I don't think that, my supervisors are not meeting up with me regularly, or they're not giving me the feedback that I want. And it's the panel's, chance to kind of like guide the supervisors in a nice way to maybe say, you need to do a little bit more with the student. So 15-minute presentation, 35 minutes of questions, 10 minutes talking to the supervisors, 10 minutes talking to you, and then everybody leaves and the panel confer, and they've got about 10 minutes to do that. Then everybody comes back in, and the candidate is told what the outcome is. Now, that is a recommendation. It's not a given thing. Okay, somebody's got their microphone on. Can they maybe put it off? And then things will happen in CAP, and there will be a report that goes in. So what is the outcome on the COC? There's one or two outcomes. The one is satisfactory. So that means the panel thinks that you've done work at the right level for your discipline or your area of research, and that they think that this research will be able to be done in 3 years or at the time frame. Or it can be unsatisfactory. That means that you've got to then develop an action plan based on the feedback that you've received from the panel, and there needs to be a follow-up review that needs to happen within 3 months. I'm wondering Are there any questions, Helen, at this stage, or do I keep going?
I've been answering them in the chat, but one of the questions was, will you be discussing the draft thesis review today?
Absolutely.
And one of the other questions earlier, and I'm just trying to find it, was, sorry. Yeah, it was Cheat Young. Can he change my principal supervisor before pre-COC?
Yes.
Okay. That's all we have so far.
Okay, that's good. So as I've said, the biggest review is the confirmation of candidature, because there you go, you basically get confirmed into the PhD. Before that, you're kind of like a no man's land. You're enrolled, but you're not confirmed yet. So the COC and a satisfactory COC means that you are confirmed and that you are now a PhD candidate. So the mid-candidature review happens between 21 to 24 months. And at this review, it is important that you have talk about your data collection and that you have started to do some analysis based on the data that you have collected. So the purpose is to look at how you've progressed from the COC, to look at your research method, because remember, with most of these things we plan and then there's reality. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you plan to do something in a certain way, that is how it will pan out. There might be different things that happen. That means that you'll have to be a bit agile and might have to change how you do the work and how you go about collecting the data. The mid-candidate review document is usually 30,000 words that you've got to write. And it usually, if you look at the statement of practice, it says that it's equivalent to the introduction, literature review, and the research method chapter, with an initial start of an analysis chapter.
Helena, we've actually, sorry for interrupting you. We actually have another question.
Yeah.
What are the basic requirements we need to fulfill before MCR? The handbook doesn't seem to mention it.
Oh, I wonder what the question, I don't quite understand the question. You have to have passed your confirmation of candidature. You need to have collected some data, and you need to have started the analysis. Unless they are referring to the graduate certificate. So by the confirmation of candidature, you have to have done your 2 core units of the graduate certificate. And then you need to do 2 other elective units, and that only needs to be done by the time that you hand in your thesis. So there's no other requirements that I can think of that is associated with the mid-candidature review.
I've asked her for clarification. I'll pop back in if she comes back.
That's okay. Good.
Thank you.
It's 90 minutes again, with you giving a 15-minute presentation, and you know, that whole thing that you go through again. I'll talk about that now. So what is typical is that you take the document, your research proposal that you've handed in at your confirmation of candidature, and you've added a chapter on the research method and about you know, your initial data analysis. So typically it will have an introduction, a literature review, a research method chapter, and your preliminary analysis of the data.
Helena, sorry to interrupt again, but just a time check. It's 11:35.
Yeah, no, we're doing well.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we're traveling well.
Okay. And
any research publications that you have. So for some of this, if you read the SOP, you don't have to hand in, you know, 30,000 words. If you have a number of publications that's equivalent to 30,000 words, that you can do that you've, say, submitted for review. So it's not a strict guideline. It can be a combination of many things that's equivalent to roughly about 30,000 words.
Helena, before you go any further, we just have clarification. So is it compulsory to collect data for MCR? And
yes,
she said
definitely.
from a full sample. And we had another question as well about, can you please explain about the extent of pre-analysis in MCR?
So I'll just go back to this slide. So usually by MCR, you should have collected most, if not all of your data, and you should have started analysis. Now that is can depend on the type of research that you do. So if I take an example of two of my students that recently have done their MCR, for one student, she's collected all of her interviews. I think there was one or two that she hasn't done. And she's started to do her analysis in vivo, but it wasn't quite finished. With the other student that have done a survey, he has collected all of his data for his survey, and he was able to present at the mid-candidature review initial analysis of the survey data. So it can depend on the discipline that you're in, and the person to ask and that can give you some guidance on this is your supervisor on how far the analysis should be completed at this stage.
Helena, sorry to interrupt again. We've had two more questions. So
yep.
Could you please elaborate what exactly mid-candidature review document means by started analysis? I would highly appreciate if you could please be a bit more specific about that. That's the first question. And then we'll go through that first and then I'll take you through the second one.
So started, the two examples that I've just mentioned, the one student have transcribed all of her data. She did interviews, she transcribed all of her data, and she has started her coding. And she was able to identify some trends or things that she's noticed in the data. The other example of the student with a survey, he's collected all of his survey. He had about 130 surveys that he's collected, and he has started working in PLS or SPSS, and he could show some correlations and some initial findings and say, here are the things that he's tried, and he was able to show which of his constructs he dropped because there was not enough correlation between that. So that's what I mean by started the analysis. You have to engage with your literature. There isn't a clear kind of like line in the sand, if I can call it that way, that says now you've done enough. That's why you need to talk to your supervisor to figure out what is the best level of analysis for your specific topic and what you've done there. With another of my students, ran into trouble. We had a whole idea that he will be doing a specific thing. So what happened with him is he collected data, had 20 or 21 case studies, and what we thought he was going to do with the data that he's collected and the theoretical underpinning that he was going to use just didn't pan out in the data. So what he reported on at his mid-candidature review is how he's hit a roadblock and how he's pivoted from that roadblock into a different direction. So he's done the analysis. He could see that what he thought would be the theoretical underpinning and what he will find in the data was not working there. I hope that answers that. The other question?
Okay, we actually have a few more questions. So is it a must to have a publication done before MCR? And how many publications are mandatory before thesis submission?
Okay, there's no mandatory requirement for publication. I call publications a risk management strategy. What happens is that if you have got publications and your thesis goes to the examiner, they are less picky on your thesis because you tell them, I've got these publications either accepted or under review, and they are less likely to come back with major revisions because you've got those publications in there. So for one of my students, he was, in the 3 years that he studied, he published 7 papers. 3 of them were journal and 4 of them were conference papers. And my rule of thumb is that 1 paper per year is a good strategy. But there's no, we don't reach the end and say, oh, you can't submit because you haven't got, 2 papers under review. It's a risk management strategy. We want, as a university, we want you to publish, because that makes that our ranking will go up, and that you will start your career as an academic, if that is what you want to do, at a better footing and have got a better chance to get accepted for an academic position than somebody that just has a PhD.
Our next question is, I'm assuming that the time frame here is for a full-time researcher. What about the PhD by PBR, 6 years part-time?
Yeah, okay. So if I say 21 to 24 months, for the PBR, it will be double that. So it will be 42 to 46 months in. They will do their mid-candidature review. So for anybody that's doing part-time, the months that I quote, you double that by 2, because you've got double the time to do it, because you're working on something else as well. Any other questions?
There are. I'm just trying to. There's too many people.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Good.
So are the GRREISM courses compulsory for students who convert from master by research to PhD?
Yes, since September last year, it is compulsory for you to do your graduate certificate, yes, if you convert from master's to PhD.
Okay, and we've got another person here saying COVID-19 has disturbed my ethics approval and data collection since my sample is non-Australian context. Will this be considered, will these specific circumstances for MCR? So
yes, you will need to discuss that with the panel. I think I'll take that one offline if you don't mind, because I think it's not a quick answer there. So
I would actually recommend that student probably attends the next session with you and Tim.
Yeah.
That might be a better idea. So let's just do that. 2 more questions. Are there any specific Swinburne guidelines on thesis by publication that can be shared? Well, I mean, that's the statement of practice, so I can share that link in the comms. And when should I get a new supervisor after I've changed my old supervisor?
Should be ASAP.
Yeah.
I think that one needs to go offline too.
Okay,
yes.
I can do that. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. So the outcome is, again, satisfactory or unsatisfactory. Satisfactory is, yes, the researcher is at the sufficient quality for your discipline area, and that it's going very well and that you will be able to submit in 12 months. Or it's unsatisfactory and you need to develop an action plan based on the feedback, and there will be a follow-up review within 3 months. So the draft thesis review. You need to submit the draft of your thesis to the panel. It is usually 60 minutes and there's no oral presentation at this session. There is a requirement that you have to make an oral presentation, but that needs to be done either at a conference or at some of the sessions somewhere else. At BCE, for example, we've had some of our PhD students make presentations as research seminars. So there is an expectation that you do an oral presentation, but not part of the draft thesis review. Now, I take the word draft in a very liberal sense, in that if there are, say, a chapter that you have got some ideas, but it's not quite written up, that it at least should have the headings and a little paragraph or sentence to say what you are going to say in this specific section. It has to be so roughly about 70,000 words, or just under, if you have, say, one chapter that hasn't been fully written. Again, follow that standard format where you will be asked by the panel to say where you're at and how much work is still left, and then it will be an answer and a question and answer session where the panel will talk to you and say, you need to think about your examiners. Here are sections that we didn't understand, or you need to work on your writing skills. For you to prepare for this, again, think about what you're going to say for 5 minutes, where you're at and where you need to put your emphasis. Think about what type of questions, and that's usually good to talk to your supervisors about this, is what type of questions do they think the panel might be asking you? I just have some background noise that I just want to see if I can stop quickly. So it's think about them, have some answers prepared. Again, if somebody asks you kind of like how, on the spot, it might be hard to come up with an answer, but it's not for you to defend what you've done. What is important is that you get some feedback and hear from the panel what they are doing. So this is a practice run for you before your thesis goes out to your examiners. And it's usually a good checkpoint to see what you still need to do and what needs to be done to be able to deliver that product at the end. So again, how to conduct the DTR, it's the same thing, 5 minutes, then about another 20 minutes of questions, 10 minutes with the supervisors, 10 minutes with you, 10 minutes for the panel to confer, and then calling you back and saying what they will recommend the outcome will be. This one has got 3 different outcomes. The one
Alana,
is satisfied. Yep.
Sorry for interrupting. I've got 2 more questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. What is meant by 60 minutes in total? And do we need to prepare a 70,000 word document for the DTR?
Definitely, this is 70,000 words for the DTR. Yes, absolutely. So it's your thesis as it is at that stage that is sent to the panel. Don't expect the panel to read everything, right? Because most of the panel members have said, do you expect us to read everything? No, I don't. What I expect, what the expectation is that the panel will read the introduction, the conclusion, and the research method, and do a 5-finger flick. I call it a 5-finger flick, going through the thesis to see whether things gel together. So yes, you have to prepare that document, and that has to go to the panel.
The other question was, what is meant by 60 minutes in total?
So that's how long that session will be.
Okay.
So it's
Thank
your
you.
5 minutes. The 10 minutes of you talking to the panel, the supervisors talking to the panel conferring, and about 20 minutes questions.
We've got 10 minutes left, Helena.
Yep, I'm nearly there. So the outcomes, that can be satisfactory, and that's the best case outcome, or it can be satisfactory behind schedule. That means that things are going well, but you're just not there to hand in. So you need to submit a finalization plan. And what the panel then do is they recommend an extension up to 6 months. So this is the only way that you can get extension, is through this draft thesis review. That you go, the panel have a look and they say, yes, things are, this is shaping up to be really nice PhD, but the student just needs a little bit more time to finalize the document. And then there needs to be a follow-up review within 3 months before you hand in your thesis. The worst case scenario is that it's unsatisfactory. So what you've handed in is not at the level that is required, and this will then lead to termination, that you won't be able to hand in your document. Now, all the time that I have been doing this, this has only happened once. Usually people at this level, at this stage, either gets a satisfactory or a satisfactory behind schedule. The key bit here is, and I get quite a number of emails from students saying, I need extension. The only way to get extension is through the draft thesis review and your panel recommending that you get up to a 6 months extension. Some of the things that I see, the panel will say 3 months or 4 months or up to 6 months. They cannot give beyond 6 months. You have to go again to a draft thesis review, and at that stage the panel can recommend, if you've done some more work and it's getting again closer, they can at that follow-up panel in extenuating circumstances give you another 6 months. So what happens with a follow-up review, right? So in one of these, you got an unsatisfactory. This is not the end of the line, right? You don't have to get, most students get really upset when they get an unsatisfactory at this, in one of these, but it's not the end of the world, right? What happens is there is a follow-up review that usually happens within 3 months. There's a procedural chair, that's usually the ADRT that gets involved. And the goal with a follow-up review is to get you back on track. We don't want you to fail. We want you to succeed. And that is where the follow-up review is really important, because the panel will tell you these are the things that you need to do. And you then are given 3 months to get yourself back on track. At that follow-up review, the panel can then say, yes, the student has done what we asked them to do, and you are back on track. If in some cases it doesn't happen, students just don't get it, and then they will, if there is an unsatisfactory outcome, then the student will be placed at risk. And even if they are placed at risk, it's not the end of the line, because then there is an at-risk process that you will go through. Again, in the at-risk process, it's not a punitive measure, it's developmental. You are guided through a process with specific goals in specific timeframes that you need to achieve, so that we can get you back on track and get back into doing your PhD.
Helena, I'm sorry to interrupt you again. I've had another 2 questions. So one person is querying, is it the same format as an MCR presentation? Which
what,
was the DTR?
The DTR.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. It is the same format, but it's shorter. It's 60 minutes.
Okay.
So there's no presentation, whereas with your MCR, you will make a presentation. With the DTR, you don't. And so it's 60 minutes for the DTR, whereas 90 minutes for the MCR.
And the other question is, what is the thesis defense process at the examination?
There is no defense process.
Okay, thank you.
So we don't have a defense. What happens is, and we will have a session next month on completion and how the examination process works. But what you do is you hand in your thesis. There's a whole process that's associated with that, and we'll talk about that next month. Okay. Any other questions? So what happens if it really goes badly, you do your follow-up review, it's still unsatisfactory, what happens there? So there's a whole process, and it will probably change in the next couple of months, but to align with some other process. But in principle, here is what's happened. If you have your follow-up review and you don't pass, you go into the at-risk process. Within 10 days, you are and your supervisors are notified that you are at risk. You have to come up with a action plan within 20 days. Then it goes through, you meet up with the Dean of Research and Development, your supervisory team, and you meet up and you have an initial meeting and the action plan is approved. And then you meet every 30 days. So there's a meeting 1, meeting 2, and in the next month, the third meeting, it will be the full panel again to see whether you are back on track. And there's 3 outcomes that can be recommended. The one is that you're back, your progress is satisfactory, you've caught up, you're back in and into doing it, and it's as if this is forgotten. Then there is, it might be that if it's your PhD and this is really not going well, then the panel, but there's some hope there, then the panel can recommend that this can be converted to a master's, or the panel can recommend that there's a termination at the end. So that is all of the type of reviews that we have, all of the type of things that can happen. And I don't know if you would like to add anything there, or if there are some other questions, Helen.
No, I don't think I need to add anything, Lana.
There hasn't been any more questions.
Okay. All right.
Oh, hang on, I spoke too soon. Yep. No, actually, it's just everyone's just saying thank you, and they've found it to be one of the best sessions on this topic in more than 2-3 years.
Thank you.